Get this in. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. This is not quite the last one, but the last of a deep dive series into world building in time periods. And so we've worked our way from prehistory, the prehistoric era, all the way up into and past the transhuman ascension of humanity. So we're going to quote unquote end this with mega structures, mega engineering, and using the ideas from that and just building or adventuring or discovering these great feats of engineering. And of course, we're going to talk about different types. I'm sure you're already at this point thinking about different types of mega engineered structures. But to help me with this, because it's a pretty bizarre and complicated and rather abstract idea of these things, I needed some help. So I have with me my co-host, Vince. Vince, please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Vincent Shine. I'm also a creator, and I wrote a pretty extensive science fiction game about stuff like we want to talk about. So yeah, I want to join him. Also, I've written down a lot of stuff from Stellaris, the game, where you can build mega structures, and maybe we can use some of the ideas they use there.
Yep. Okay, so mega structures. What are we talking about when we talk about mega structures? All right. My very extremely generalized idea for mega structures are structures that are so large and require so much energy that at the present time in our own society, we have the theoretical ability to create them, and it's only theory, but the amount of materials and energy to build them would be nearly global or possibly even interstellar sized creations.
The main problem we still have is material strength. So having stuff that holds together while being that big is a huge problem currently. So we still need better materials to build them. And we already talked about some of the near future megastructures we could think about, something like a space elevator. For those who don't know what a space elevator is, the idea is basically that you build some kind of rope which goes from the surface of a planet to the orbit, and then you could basically just lift objects from the Earth up to space, up to the orbit, which would drastically reduce the cost to bring materials into orbit. It's basically said that a space elevator would be the first step to a spacefaring civilization, because without it, it would be way too expensive and cost way too much energy to do so.
Yeah, and the idea of a space elevator also makes it the ultimate goal, of course, would allow most common residents on planetary surfaces like Earth to have very easy access to space, because now, of course, it's so expensive not just to lift materials but people. Every space flight that has ever happened, they've had to take into account things as small as the weight of paper and bolts and clothing, and because space is such a premium, because they have to use so much fuel to lift materials up from a gravity well into zero gravity.
I've just looked it up, and it currently costs about $10,000 to lift 1 kilogram into space. And a space elevator would reduce this cost to maybe $100, maybe $200. So that would be a cut to 1% of the current cost, which is huge.
Yeah, and there are other so-called mega structures that people are thinking of. Elon Musk is thinking of a vacuum tube for like a rail or subway system. He's already worked. He has like a 2 or 3 mile version.
The Hyperloop.
The Hyperloop, exactly. And the idea of creating a bridge or tunnel system that goes across our oceans and links the entire world or something. I've heard of doing that from across the Bering Strait from Alaska and Canada through Russian space and then down toward and then coming across the upper Arctic and then back down across like Mongolia and Russia and towards Japan. I've heard of that in the past. You mentioned the literal suspension bridge across
which is tethered on a geostatic satellite. So you could basically build a huge bridge which is supported by a satellite, by strings to a satellite, which is currently, of course, not possible because these tethered would be way too long. But yeah, there are some ideas. We also talked about the potential of building satellites which project sunlight at nighttime, which could also have huge possibilities, even just for events or whatever. Just having the possibility to make it at night and make it at daylight during the event, stuff like that, or maybe for farming or whatever. There are huge possibilities, but those are all near future megastructures, which we could still imagine. Stuff which normally is categorized at megastructures is way bigger and way much more in the future.
Yeah. Dead Man brings up in Eclipse Phase has the Rotovator in orbit over Venus and transferring people cargo to various aerostats. Yeah, it's almost like a high-tech version of a pulley system of sorts. I'm sure using all kinds of super tough materials, especially on Venus, because Venus is supposed to be extremely hot and volatile, and so I'm sure it's like a pulley system to bring materials up from the surface of Venus into the aerostats, which in a certain way the aerostats are megastructures, floating cities that are buoyant to float in the upper atmosphere of Venus.
Yeah, because Venus' atmosphere is so thick that you couldn't land on the surface, and it would be way too hot and too much radiation down there. That's why you need to suspend the cities in the on the atmosphere.
Yeah, and now in the Eclipse Phase role-playing game, they actually have I don't want to say colonies. They have miners that work on the surface, and they suggest that it is so hot that the machines and mechanized machines that operate on the surface could not move if they were brought out of the surface. That they're made from pressed carbon, diamond hard materials and things, that the lubricating systems in the machines don't even, it's not even hot. There's no other place hot enough for them to become liquid until they're on the surface of or in the atmosphere of Venus. Yeah, Alex C says acid rain, literal acid. Yeah, that's crazy. But what we're going to talk about are mega structures.
Yeah, the first thing we talked about is the Dyson Sphere. For those who don't know, a Dyson Sphere is the basically concept idea that you build a sphere around the sun and absorb all the energy the sun gives out into a solar system. So you would basically encase it completely, and then you could use, in theory, 100% of the energy the sun gives out, which is absolutely crazy and most likely completely impractical, because people who are way smarter than I am calculated this stuff. And if we want to do something like that with our sun, we could dismantle all the planets in our solar system. We would still not have enough material.
Yeah, exactly. But versions. Well, here's the strange thing: the Dyson Sphere concept, while absolutely cool, I mean, it was even an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation where they found a Dyson Sphere and actually flew into it. But the original Dyson Sphere was really a Dyson swarm, and then since then others have come up with, I don't want to say better ideas, but more logical ideas, and even
Yeah,
that's and that's
the Dyson swarm is the basic idea that you that you build satellites which swarm around the sun, and then you use the energy these satellites produce to create more satellites. And
right. It's an ever it's not a true perpetual energy machine, but essentially it's the idea of like using 100% of the energy you're getting to self-replicate another satellite, which would be almost planet-sized, and then use that to help replicate another one, and so on and so forth. Right? It's the it's the idea of using a 3D printing machine to build another 3D printing machine. So now you've got two, and those two then can print more, and you start dismantling your own solar system, and it's just a crazy idea. But the other idea is the ring world, the halo, the idea that you have a belt around your sun in the orbit your planet would normally orbit.
Yeah, in the inhabitable zone.
Yep,
which is basically the orbit of our planet, of the Earth currently around the sun.
Right, and then you spin it for gravity, add walls, they'd be what, 1,000 miles high or so. I mean, it'd be some ludicrous sized object, and then you spin it for gravity, and then you would live on the interior surface. And when you would look up, your eye would see the horizon, but the horizon would rise towards the sky. And you would look up, and you would, no matter where you stood on it, you would always see the sun at high noon. And then you would create, of course, many of these ideas, all of course, are theoretical, but there's the idea of creating like satellites that would block the sun, so you would have daylight and a day-night cycle. Those satellites that would block the sun would absorb energy. You would have maybe lasers.
Couldn't you just open and close a wall? Maybe? Wouldn't that be easier?
Above you?
Yeah, you have the ring, and you're living on the outside of the ring, if I remember correctly. Couldn't you just make the inner side move, maybe? That you have closed and open spaces? I'm thinking you're living on the inside of the ring. So wouldn't you, if you spin it, living on the outside because the force goes outside?
No. You would spin it and be pushed downwards. So you would be pushed. The gravity would push you away from the sun. That's what I've heard. Yeah, you live on the inside of the ring.
You are on the outside. So basically, if you have the ring, you're living on the outer side of the ring away from the sun, and then you could rotate the inner side of the ring with maybe glass on one space and completely impassable walls on the other side, so you could have whatever.
You're thinking on the outside. No, it's a spinning ring centrifugal force where you're on the inside of the ring like an amusement ride, and you're being spun and pushed away from the sun, which creates the gravity.
I think we're thinking the same thing, but describe it differently. But that's details which maybe are not the most interesting thing about it here.
Right. So okay. So I came up with 3 general categories. The most common and most popular, down to the one that's a little bit, I think would be quite problematic. Okay. So the first category is that the PCs, the whatever galactic empire that encounters this one or multiple megastructure, the culture that created it no longer exists. Someone creates this thing, people creates this megastructure, PCs find it, and when I say PCs, it could be either lone explorers, or it could be a galactic empire that's inhabited this thing for 5 generations. But whatever the case may be, they find it, and no one knows how it was created. they might be able to maintain it, maybe, but essentially
maybe it's like 90% destroyed, but you can still live in the remaining 10% or whatever.
Right. So, and basically, honestly, that's the most common, and there's a reason for it being the most common, because it's hard for us to imagine creating it in the first place. So the best thing to go is like, look, whatever, it exists. Let's just accept that it exists and then move on with our lives. The second category would be that the main society, or PCs, come from a society, but they are part of a government in which living members of that government actually own and operate this megastructure, but the PCs do not have access to that technology. So there could be one or more creative forces in this universe that are extremely high tech. Maybe they could be anything from dictatorial overlords to just being beneficial, or just scientists.
I always thought about the Asgard from Stargate. They are basically like a super high-tech civilization, but they don't give away the technology just like that until other civilizations have proven worthy or whatever. And they could basically construct all these different mega structures and maybe use them to protect other civilizations, or maybe to rule over them or whatever. I've even used something like that in my campaigns, basically like the Deus Ex Machina of the campaign. When something really goes wrong, they show up and fix it.
Yeah. I mean, and that makes perfect sense, right? Some of the guys are bringing up things like, it'll be expensive, and I'm sorry, Deadman the Storyteller says Dreadcat Bonkers has posted a link in the Discord about designing a Dyson swarm, which we didn't bring up. We'll talk about Dyson swarms as well. And Alexia says, imagining having the occasional flare from the sun, will it have a defense mechanism, or what destroyed the portions in the first place? And there are a couple of novels and plenty of scientists that have thought about those problems, such as like point defense systems for asteroids, shields against solar flares. How do you keep such a massive thing from being disrupted with gravity? Because despite space being so large, there's always gravity affecting everything else in space, even in minor methods. And so just a slight variation in its spin would really disrupt it if it was a ring.
The thing is, if we talk about megastructures, we are not talking about like the next 100 years, maybe not even the next 500 years. That's maybe 1,000 years in the future or whatever, because it's really not possible for us to imagine how this shit should work. And maybe up until this time, we have found methods to combat all these problems. Maybe we can create artificial gravity. Maybe we can control the sun somehow, that we can stabilize it so we can use it better.
Right.
There are lots of possible ideas we could develop until then.
Yeah. I mean, even Deadman brings up, the super catastrophic and bizarre thing of iron bombing the sun. He says iron bombing the sun would be catastrophic, and that's essentially like shutting down the sun, turning it into like an iron ball, which is, I mean, we're thinking of things that are so far out of our imagination. So, okay, Dyson Swarm versus Dyson Sphere. Okay, the classic idea of the Dyson Sphere is a shell, a completely solid shell, completely around a sun, which of course we know would be bombarded from the outside by loose objects, even if we could take in all the materials of our own solar system, or whatever solar system this created. It would never be able to avoid the possibility of being hit by comets and meteors and radiation from the outside of the shell. But originally, the Dyson Sphere was a Dyson swarm, and a swarm would be the idea of, and I'm going to make this very general, imagine creating multiple Earths and then putting them in the same orbit, like a big giant ring of different Earths. And then what you do is you start creating more rings of other planetary sized satellites, and you spin those rings so the rings would overlap and they would move in different I'm going to call them different orders. Some would be closer to the sun, some would be further away, and it would be a swarm of satellites around the sun, each of those satellites absorbing the sun's energy, creating more energy to maintain the swarm and the rings and such. So some make it look like it's a shell, like a pockmarked shell. Others make it have design images where it looks like multiple rings all spinning in different directions, but they're all just rings overlapping each other.
Yeah, in Stellaris, it looks like a lot of hexagons connected. And in the game, you can basically start building it, and it has like 4 phases, where in one phase you just have a couple of these hexagons finished, and then more and more and more, and you get more energy output. They also, because I have made the list, I will mention a couple of things they also have as megastructures. They have also a matter decompressor, which is basically a giant construction which can extract matter out of a black hole, which you could basically use to create basically unlimited amount of matter. Then you have a sentry array, which can scan a whole solar system, a whole sector of a galaxy. Science nexus, which is basically just producing a shit ton of science.
Okay.
A mega art installation, where you have a giant art piece, which could attract multiple civilizations.
Yeah.
Interstellar assembly, which is basically something like a hub for different species to come to your system.
Oh, that's crazy.
And the super weapons also.
Super weapons, yeah. I mean,
where you could destroy whole planets, but also they have a weapon which could encase a whole planet in some kind of energy field, so nobody can get out or get in. So you have basically like a giant zoo now, which you can look into.
Yeah, megastructures are the thing that's like it's. well, first of all, you never want to give it to your PCs, and it's.
And if you do, make sure that the enemies also have this stuff, and you make sure that it's really complex, because if you use this stuff, then you have to abstract, and you have to abstract a lot.
Right. Now, of course, Foolish Kiwi brings up the idea that blocking the sun would mess up orbits, but in a Dyson sphere or swarm,
what orbits?
Yeah, you would eliminate the idea of orbits at all. So you would be getting sunlight 100% of the time, at 100% of the structures you make. Right, that's the idea behind a
Dyson sphere is not really to be livable. It's just a giant energy producer. Right. I'm not even sure how to store all this energy, to be honest. How the fuck do you store the energy of a sun?
Right. If we all know that it's theoretical, right? It's physics taken to its ultimate end. So it's like, well, we have this small solar collector. What if we make it the size of our, Earth? And then, let's go even bigger than that. Now, Nephrite says that they missed the first part. Has Larry Niven's ring world been brought up? And yeah, we brought it up, the idea of a ring world a little bit. And in Larry Niven's ring world, that ring world had the culture that built it is gone, and the purpose. Sorry, giving away spoilers in the book. It's been out for 40 years or something. The idea is that the culture is gone, and there's a mission to find the ring world and settle it, because the galactic core has exploded, and in 50,000 years, the radiation from the galactic core will wipe out the current empire. So they need to move everyone to the ring world, because the ring world is made of a material that can block the radiation. And the explorers land on Ringworld to explore it. And they go through the process of the fact that this ring world, when flattened out, and you look at the material, that it is Earth flat, spread side by side, at least 10 Earths wide, and with walls that are like 1,000 miles high, and the entire inner surface of the ring, I think, is something on the order of like I don't know, maybe a million to a million Earths living surface or something. It's crazy huge, and I know people have done the mathematical calculations of how much space there would be, but it would be daunting, assuming that you could live inside of a shell or a sphere or multiple spheres that exist around a star or a sun. That the idea of holding trillions times a trillions people and still have space left over is mind-boggling. And then
I think the more practical thing would be just to build a lot of smaller things and just let them float in the orbit and use that instead. Because why would you build such a huge structure if you don't absolutely have to? I think it would be way more practical just to build more if you need more space, and gather more materials if you need more, and then suddenly you have maybe a giant trailer park in space, which are all connected. Yep. And I think that would be more practical, to be honest.
Yeah, but essentially giant satellites, moon-sized, Earth-sized satellites connected through either orbiting in such a way that they don't, of course, bump into each other, or connected through, and I'm saying this cables, but cables that would be, hundreds of miles wide, connecting them together like a lattice of sorts, more of a web or a lattice rather than a solid object. Yeah. But like Foolish Kiwi saying, saying basically, I'm saying without that outward force, the other planetary objects in your system would push them in, pushing them out, causing them to suck inward toward your sphere. But if the idea would be, you would dismantle every object in your solar system. So we would take our Oort cloud and Pluto and Mars, and we would dismantle them, create this sphere in the first place. So there wouldn't be an asteroid belt. There wouldn't be other planets. We would just construct them out of those materials. But the idea of doing that, the thing is that it feels like a downward spiral, because even if you could do that, there's always other objects out there, right? There will always be other objects out there that would impact your.
Yeah. And this thing is, if the players would really control something like that, then it would mean they control a civilization.
Yeah.
And it would basically turn from a role-playing game into a strategy game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Nephrite says it's essentially a suspension bridge with no endpoints. Exactly. For Earth equivalent surface gravity, the ring spins at 770 miles per second. Tens of meters thick, millions of kilometers wide, billions of kilometers long, and then you just keep ramping that up, right? It's just, it would just be crazy. And Deadman says, in Eclipse Phase does have a Dyson sphere around the star Olaf, in gate crashing, which is it's like a Stargate in that setting. The Pandora gates, you step through to another location, and there is a Dyson sphere there. Yeah, and of course, if you have the ability to dismantle a whole planet, you have technologies that we can't even imagine. Gravity generators and the ultimate breaking of our concept of how physics works.
Yeah, I always think about, I'm not sure if you know the show, but in Steven Universe, there is a civilization, the Gems, which are basically like a civilization right before building something like a Dyson Sphere, and they travel around in space and destroying planets and using complete energy of their planets to create more gems. And that's the concept we are talking about here, that you have civilizations which can dismantle complete planets, and that's the dimensions they think of. And the interesting thing about the show is that they want to show these beings which need to destroy planets that life has value, and that you shouldn't just destroy everything, but see what value you have on these planets. And that's actually interesting again, because if you start to think in a galactic scale, then thinking about stuff like what is one life worth, it's like, what is one civilization worth? That's the dimension we think about here.
Yeah, and you know, you're absolutely right. I mean, what value do a billion people have when you're talking about a trillion times a trillion? You start getting into these numbers that just are so bizarre, right? And I think the original classification I brought up, where the PCs, and whether it's just the PCs on their own, or whether there's this empire that finds this object or series of objects and exploring it because that's the original society is dead. I think that's more or less the most reasonable way to handle it, considering that it's completely unreasonable in the first place. But because in the book Ringworld, they brought up quite a number of topics which they weren't able to really explore, but it did bring up the idea. I'll give you certain examples. The explorers land on the Ringworld. Society's completely gone. They had like floating buildings that were destroyed. They had hovercraft that didn't work any longer, etc. And the people that lived on the inner surface of the world, because the Ringworld was so large, that many of them began to diverge genetically and became different species amongst themselves. And the explorers didn't know which of them was the original creators of the Ringworld builders, because so many other species on the Ringworld were able to diverge genetically and never meet each other. For example, they had problems with, once the society died, they couldn't become spacefaring again, because on Earth we can mine for materials like iron and copper, and we learned the process materials in our natural habitat. An artificial building, artificial creation has no natural resources except the ones that they put in it, right? So there would be no trees unless people put trees in it. There would be no materials to mine for unless they actually buried those raw materials in the ground to be mined. So they basically lost their spacefaring technology. They explain it because the Ringworld actually was impacted by a planetoid that punched through it, and they thought it was a mountain, but actually they come to find out it wasn't really a mountain. It was a volcano where the top of the volcano led into space, and if you looked down through the volcano, it was just a big giant hole. It was so bizarre. Like one of the species on the Ringworld were called ghouls, and they learned to eat dead materials and other dead beings because there was no place to bury anyone. There were these barbaric people, ogre-like people that were fighting over grasslands. So they weren't meat eaters; they were actually vegetarians. But they became very bestial because they needed to protect their grasslands and stuff. It was just a bizarre concept, and you can create so much in a Dyson swarm field, and you could introduce something, have the PCs encounter it, leave it, and never encounter it again, and still never explore the entire Dyson creation.
Yeah, and in my game Astrocitus, I thought about having something like a hyper intelligence, which is basically like a lot of intelligences as large as a moon, which are all connected and form one full intelligence. And through the event which destroyed everything, they become disconnected, and each of these planetoids had a part of the personality of the whole intelligence. So each of them is basically dominated by one desire or one emotion. And because they are still megastructure level intelligences, they use this stuff to the extreme. And for example, I have one of them who is just very anxious all the time. So she tries to build a sphere around her solar system to protect herself. And another one is very giving and tries to basically destroy itself to help others, but in a so extreme way that they disrupt more than they help. So basically, they give so much food that they are flooded with food and kill thousands of people with it, or they destroy all the weapons on a spaceship, so they can't hurt anymore, but they are defenseless now, and stuff like that. And I have a couple of these different intelligences where I just play with the idea what absolute power you could. What would happen if these things would be dominated by a specific emotion or idea?
That'd be fun, kind of hilarious, but dangerous too, especially if you could really explore this like Dyson swarm or Dyson net as if you were exploring a galactic universe, but it would all be in one location. So like you're saying, there could this intergalactic intelligence may have split or fragmented itself to these different orbiting satellites. And we're saying satellites, but some of these satellites would be the sizes of Earth or larger, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
in my idea, each of them has a different system, but basically it's the same idea. Yeah.
Yep. Foolish Kiwi says a Dyson ring or net around a sentient star. Possible. I mean, but I'm thinking of like having fun with the exploration part of it. So, for example, maybe like Vince says, maybe there's rumors that there's one of these satellites that's connected to all the others, right? But they're not communicating. Maybe they find out, oh, there's this one satellite where we can get all the resources we ever need. They find it, and then come to find out that it's more of a problem than it really than it was worth. And now they have to figure out how to like stop it from communicating with the other or getting in touch with the other structures in the entire swarm. And
basically they're fighting each other also. And if they would reconnect, they would basically be unstoppable. So you have to find a way to disrupt them or maybe fought them up against each other.
Yeah. I mean, I think you could have fun even creating multiple. You could create tens of thousands of societies and still not and still never fully encompass the amount of space we're talking about. So presuming that these satellites are connected through cables or roads or bridges of sorts, each society in part of this ring or net could hold tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions even in each of their own individual locations, and never have a need or even desire to have to explore outside of their zone, although they could. And then the player characters may come from each of these regions as well, if they were born and raised in this society. And the only thing that they would all know was that the sun would be above them, right? They know where the sun is. They know where that star is located. And they know that, I'm sure if they looked out, they could see this network of society, of these satellites, but maybe they've never gone there or were unable to go there, right? So that could be a possibility as well. Maybe some of these AI have specifically sectioned off things to either protect them, or maybe there's something dangerous, or fear of the unknown, or lack of data. Anything. Yeah, I mean, hell, it could be something dangerous or poisonous, or like a giant zoo, like you mentioned, or a completely aquatic one. And just, you could completely explore this like Dyson sphere of sorts and never ever run out of space to explore more space. I can't I can't describe things in those astronomical.
That's the weird thing, because if you're talking about something that large, then you basically have no end ever. That's the good thing about sci-fi, for example. You can always just say, okay, there's another planet, maybe there's another megastructure, maybe there's another section, maybe whatever. On a fantasy setting, you basically have a whole map, and that's it usually, and then you have to travel to different dimensions. But in a sci-fi setting, you can always just say, okay, you travel along, and there's another thing and another thing.
Right. And normally the most common thing, of course, is I travel in my starship and I go to this other place. And then you can throw things in there like, oh, we go into our warp drift drive or something, and something happens and we are accidentally deposited in some unknown territory of space. I mean, that happens all the time in sci-fi. Someone travels, there's an accident, they wake up somewhere different. You know, the navigation computer was corrupted, we're somewhere different. Something took over our navigation computer and we arrived somewhere we didn't want to. And hell, even in Star Wars, there's the outer reaches or something. In Star Trek, they're always going to yet one more planet that has been undiscovered. So when it comes to mega structures, it's weird because it feels like it's insular, right? It feels like you're not exploring outwards, you're exploring inwards. But at the same time, there's enough surface space that you never run out of places to explore. The drawback, I think, of us thinking about it is that once you discover something that hasn't been explored in this Dyson structure, it will spread to other places. But the size and scope we're talking about is you could have a complete underwater society of 15 billion people, and it would have nearly no impact on any other structures around it because of its size and scope and scale. You know what I mean? It's bizarre to think about that, but it's possible for that to exist in the sizes we're thinking of.
I just remembered this movie. Oh man, and the City of 1,000 Planets.
Valerian.
Yeah, Valerian, exactly. I forgot the name. And they have basically the same idea, that you have a connected habitat with different civilizations, which are all connected together, and each of them has their own ecosystem and whatever inside this whole city. And they are working together, but also have their specific places where they can live and have their civilization and culture and whatever.
Yeah, even that was a Dyson sphere of sorts.
It was basically a giant habitat.
Yeah, and it grew. It was basically one culture meets another culture, and then more cultures kept meeting each other, and they were attaching their, I don't want to call them generation ships, but basically they would travel there to connect with yet another species in the galaxy, and it kept growing larger and larger. So it was growing organically. It wasn't one structure built for everyone. It was thousands of structures all connected together in unity and wanting to be part of this larger galactic government. And so it was basically this hodgepodge of neighborhoods, some under, some zero gravity, some real tall, some, under heavy radiation, some brightly lit, some in complete darkness, et cetera, poisonous gases because they breathe methane. Like, you could just go on and on and on, and it was all connected together. And then there were police officers that had to figure out how to patrol the whole thing.
Yeah, there were some really great ideas in this movie, but the movie itself was a bit underwhelming, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree.
But I've actually made a list of ideas which they presented in this movie while watching it, because I found it so interesting. Because they also had this one city which which was basically in a different dimension, and you could only interact with it while using these glasses, and then using a specific device which could make you touch something inside and whatever. It was just such a cool idea.
like you said, the movie was but the idea of 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 a city you can't interact with unless you are you reach through the other dimension was really cool because what did they do? They dropped people off in the middle of a desert.
Yeah, it was just a giant market.
Yeah, it was a giant market, and you basically the people paid so that they could reach through to the other dimension to buy something and then pull that item back into their own dimension.
Yeah, there was a device which could transfer the items from the other dimension into yours at the end.
Yeah, it was like portable like wormholes or dimension doors or something.
Maybe just dimension shift, something like the concept in D&D that you have the shadow dimension and the other dimension. They are overlapping over other hours, and they could use devices to touch and use them, but could not switch over completely.
Yeah, and Dead Man brings up the fact that Valerian is based on a series of novels which were created many years ago.
Comic books.
Yep, graphic novels and
I think French comic book it was.
Yes,
I started reading them after I saw the movie because I found the ideas so interesting. But they're really hard to read, in my opinion.
Well, again, we all know that unfortunately, movies are not usually very successful in translating long form media like novels.
I think it sometimes depends on how you do it and with what intention. I personally found the Lord of the Rings movies better than the books because the pacing in the books is just so slow. I can't really stand reading the books, to be honest.
Never read the books, although I like the first Ring. But I think the idea here is that I really think you could. We normally think of science as needing to be extremely realistic, but because we're talking in such large scales and with such theoretical science that it becomes a little more fantastical.
Why not use something completely out of our normal thinking? I had the idea of using Nastositas using a system which is just a giant tree, where each branch of the tree is as large as a planet, and then thinking about how the fuck would that work?
Right. You're like, at first you go, it would never work. Because, I mean, all of us, it's easy to be naysayers, right? Nah, that wouldn't work. But then you have
to start thinking about it. You could only live on a specific part of the branch, because if the tree is rotating, then you need a specific distance from the tree, and then you need something that creates light. And then I thought about maybe there are giant fireflies which float around and produce light. And stuff like that. You can just go all out. If you start using megastructure, start using fantastical shit, because it's possible then.
Right. I mean, if a society can create something the size of a whole other Earth next to the Earth you're already living on, then you're going to have. We could take our imaginations and then make it planet-sized. So, like you mentioned earlier, you could have a whole planet that is devoted completely to someone's artistic pursuit, right? They create a planet that's just one person's head sculpted.
In one of my sci-fi games, the whole Earth is basically a giant museum, and it's artificially kept at the state of the 1980s. Because the aliens who made it just found this time period so interesting. So it looks completely like the 1980s, but everyone on the planet is not human, but some kind of robot or shape-shifting alien or whatever, which pretends to be a human from the 1980s.
That's so silly, but cool though. I mean, you could have so much fun with it. It just like, I mean, you could have whole planets that encompass a particular time period, right? Hey, have a good one, Alex.
Yeah,
Have a good
I,
Oh,
I've also had the idea of one of the giant intelligences I talked about is obsessed with entertainment. So basically, all he does is recruit people to entertain him. So he basically kidnaps entire planets, populations, and filters them out through how competent they are at fighting or entertainment, different entertainment things, and then just trains them until they are the best of the best of the best, and then just does nothing but watch them.
oh no, that would be painfully hilarious if you had these intergalactic overlords, all with their own little obsessions, all living around this star, because to them it's not a big deal, but to the populations that live under them, it's it is it would be the idea of um the fantasy idea of a bard coming from this society that's all about entertainment, right? So it's you could have individuals that in their own society they're average, but when they leave, they're like nearly superhuman in what they do. So a society built around
Yeah, there's this idea from John Carter of Mars, where he just because he got to Mars, he suddenly is superhuman because of the lowered gravity and stuff.
Exactly.
Also Superman. Superman was completely normal on his own planet, but on Earth he is Superman.
Exactly. You could play with and have character ideas that are now. Of course, you don't have to have character ideas where, hey, I'm playing Superman. But what I mean is that you could explain away some of the more fantastical elements some of the PCs have simply because they've left their own society to go with another one, right? So imagine this like Dyson swarm, and one of the places is spun so that it's like super high gravity, but when they leave, they can jump really far. They have really great endurance. They're super strong, but in their own society, they're just average. You could even play it up and say like one of them is a scientist from their world, but when they leave, they're super strong and fast.
Yeah, they made this shit in Orville, where
Yes,
where the security officer is from a society which values only intelligence, but when they leave their own planet, they are super strong.
exactly, and everyone thinks of them as like superhuman, and and to themselves they just like shrug it off because what's the point of having strength?
You are barbaric. You are using your physical strength and whatever.
Yeah, I think you could have a lot of fun with it. Unfortunately, again, mentally thinking of a how do you say a intergalactic empire that's all in one location, each having their own planet-sized habitat to live in, is still something that's so mind-boggling. It I just imagining a billion people with their own culture, their own technology, their own society, their own habitats connected to 10,000, 100,000, a billion other habitats who all have their own individual needs and wants. It's just a bizarre thing to think about around, these this
Yeah.
mega structure type
Just
society.
imagine the council meetings for something like that.
Oh man.
Holy shit.
um
We
and then
need
how
more suns because we eat suns. And then the other ones are like, but we can't stand light. And
I you could even make like vacation homes that are the size of like Venus and Mercury that orbit inside of this dome-like structure. So you could have outlying areas, maybe. I mean, if they have enough technology to create this thing, they have enough technology to not worry about the gravitational problems. So you could have someone whose summer home is the size of our moon, and that's where they live. And it's like, oh, let's go to the casino, Las Vegas, and it's the size of Earth's moon, and it's just a casino planet of sorts.
And I just started thinking about this miniature planet from Did you watch it? Dragon and the Kai lives on this miniature planet which just has one house on it and one car, and he can just drive around this miniature planet all the time. And it has the same gravity as a normal as Earth, even though it's so small.
I think that's so bizarre. I mean, we've seen it before, but the idea that you have a planet where the horizon's only like 100 feet away from you. It's just a round, like you said, a round ball that you could just literally drive or walk around to get to the other side in 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Like that's, but it's possible if you could accept the fact that something like this could be created, the rest of it is possible. Even hell, you could even have space elevators that crisscross past the star to get from one side to the other side.
I've seen that on a role-playing game where they got inside something like a Dyson Sphere, and there were small planets floating inside, and they were all connected with some kind of vortex, which got between them. So you basically have to jump really high, and then you accelerate and decelerate and land on the other planet.
Yeah, that's. I could Google some images. I'll get in trouble for doing that if I post it up. But yeah, I mean, there's some. If you
there's always the Discord.
Yeah. You can post. I maybe I should bring up some because I do have some saved on my computer of the theoretical imaging of what some of these places look like, and it's just incredible. Like some of the creativity they've come up with, where you look up in the sky and you see what looks like small objects, but they're exceedingly huge. But I think the gaming part of this, the role playing part of this, is that you wouldn't really need to have you wouldn't have to deal with starships so much, right? If you want to get your players from one place to another, they could just travel there on trains, or it would be a so-called local trip, as opposed to having to explain how they travel from one place to another without spending months or years in transit.
Just put a Stargate somewhere.
Yep. And you just walk through, go to another place, and you're there.
Maybe you even have something like a transport hub where they're basically like hundreds of Stargates all connect in different places, and you just have to walk there and then walk to where you want, and that's it.
Yep. Foolish Keith says, lesson of the day, go into architectural engineering. In the future, we're going to need a lot of folks to build this big boy. Yeah. That I can't imagine the time and energy it would take to build.
This would take not even generations. That would take. I'm not even sure what words we would use for that shit. That would be hundreds or even thousands of years, which would we needed to build something like that. And they would basically be a different species which started this, then ended it.
Unless you accept the fact that maybe in this giant galactic empire, everyone brings their own habitat, and I don't want to say it got out of hand, but each race or culture or faction brings their own habitat, and so they start collecting around this star until
which is basically the concept of Valerian.
Yeah. And as everyone starts getting, attaching, maybe it starts out as a dozen, and then they start attaching themselves to each other, and then it just keeps growing and growing. And and then of course someone builds a military outbase or something, and they build that, and then someone is like, oh, I want to make a casino, and they build that, and then someone else says, well, we're going to translate in a farming community, so they bring that in, and then and so on and so forth, and maybe it just starts to spread around this star system, and then of course some of the cultures start dismantling the things nearby, comets and planets and moons and asteroids for more materials, and then it just starts to spread.
Yeah,
kind of different. It's really weird to think of it.
I think the organic way of growing it would be way more realistic than just starting such a ring world and just building it and until it's finished. That sounds way more unlikely than just having a lot of smaller elements just put together.
Yeah, because
it's similar like to the ISS, where you just have a lot of modules which you just stick together, and when you need something new, you just put on another module, and that's it.
Exactly. Sorry, I was a foolish Kiwi. It's being silly. And I like it too. Yeah. In order to build something that big by one plan would mean, unless an AI did it, I can't imagine a society agreeing to build something and then building it for 10,000 years, right? With the same plan, the same desire to do so. Over time, people would disagree over what they were doing and how they would do it and the materials used to do it. And I think organically, having it being built organically would probably make more sense. Now, I could imagine there would be rules, right? Like some would say, your society is harmful to everyone else. So we have protocols in terms of how
there would be some kind of military or police force on side of these giant structures which try to maintain order, or maybe keep certain civilizations isolated from everyone else. And they're basically just allowed to produce something and bring it out, or maybe communicate through technology, but not personally or whatever.
Yeah,
I think there would be a lot of civilizations which would not be possible otherwise. If you're just a intelligent cloud of energy or whatever, then what the fuck would you talk to them?
I don't even know. I mean, but also those people would be integrated into the society after a while. So those barbaric aliens would eventually be inducted into the military and police forces and become politicians and things.
Kiwi said those darn D154 folks keep growing funny mushrooms.
Oh, gotta say goodbye. Babe, have a good day. It's gonna be rainy today. All right. Thank you. Love you, baby. Yeah, we've hit the hour mark. Yeah. So yeah, I think the Valerian idea is probably the best the best outcome for a role-playing setting. I think because you could go you have the perfect collection of a ton of new cultures, a reason for creating this giant megastructure without necessarily needing a single overlord who created it. You can create any kind of race, background, technology combination that you want, including environment as well.
I mean, the thing is, it's super weird, but it also has a shit ton of potential.
Yeah, and as long as you just accept the fact that some of this just doesn't make perfect sense, but it's better to have a great story than it is to explain it mathematically or through physics. I thought as long as you accept that part, I think it would be really great. I mean, even
if we start talking about megastructures, you have to throw out your logic out of the window to a certain degree, at least.
Yeah, the idea of using dimensional transit systems to get around, and the idea of artificial gravity generators and psionic abilities and shape-shifting aliens and
replicators and
you just have to it would be fun to have like a PC that is a portion of just basically a giant like
hive mind.
Yeah, like a hive mind, and the PC is just a portion of that hive mind. And like for example, in Eclipse phase, technically you can't die. You know, you have the cortical stacks and all that kind of stuff. But instead, you could just reskin it and go, well, when my PC dies, my hive mind just extrudes another PC for me, right? You could have a lot of fun with that, especially if they don't retain some of their memories or they have a different personality. But everyone thinks they're this one individual, but they're like multiples of the same individual extruded off of this one hive mind consciousness or something. Like you could have so much fun with the bizarreness of it. And
in Far-Flung, you can play a character which is called a Gestalt, which is basically like a group of persons and which is able to reproduce itself rapidly. So you could basically make anything from replicators to having just a race which can split itself apart and whatever you want. And that's the Gestalt you could play in this game. If you want to play something crazy like that, I can recommend Far-Flung to a certain degree because they have a shot ton of good ideas. But the rules are just
yeah. It's and what we're talking about. This is weird to say, but it kind of sometimes some of the sci-fi role-playing systems kind of break a little bit. I would almost suggest using a superhero game system and just reflavoring it as high tech, because a lot of superhero game systems are designed to build
basically anything,
right? They're just components, right? Hey, I want to build something tough or fast or quick or small or large, and they just give you component pieces to build, and that's just reskinning it as just being another race or another
there's
robot.
There's even a show which plays with this idea. Do you know Ben 10?
Yes.
Where basically all the aliens are different superheroes.
Yep.
And that's the same idea here.
Yeah, you could so in a way, in a weird way, we've kind of gone in a big giant circle, because this super high technology society could be bordering on the literal fantasy. People with wings, elves, dwarves, technology that's indecipherable from magic, psionic abilities that are, indecipherable from magic.
You should read the description from Far-Flung, because there's stuff like in there like, okay, you can interact with basically every life form or artificial life form, or have sex with them, and reproduce some new species or whatever. We don't judge here.
Yeah. Kiwi's like, it's like, we were trying to find Granddad, but he's splitting the 4 thumb drives. Yeah, dude, that's some of the outrageousness in Eclipse Phase and like the transhuman type of setting. You could, I guess it's strange because we didn't really go down a very dark path. For some reason, transhumanism just seems to bring out the darkness in all of us.
Maybe it depends. I mean, you could just have fun with it.
True. Sometimes maybe we take things a little too seriously. So sometimes it's actually a good thing to have a little fun with your setting, especially if it has a lot of dark elements to it, because there could be extremely dark elements to it, whether there's a dictator's trying to rise and starts like committing genocides in this orbital society, or someone puts a virus into a system that starts mind controlling hundreds of thousands of people to do their bidding and commit these horrible atrocities, but the people can't stop themselves, but they're seeing themselves commit atrocities. Or someone very rich and powerful starts basically buying up slave labor and forcing people into his own, slave harem to perform all kinds of sexual deviancies and such. And so you could get very dark with it, and the PCs have to stop it. But the surrounding, the larger environment might not be as dark. So the PCs are the wall between, turning into total anarchy and in a very static
I
and
mean, you can always
unchanging
just
society.
say that these horrendous things are the bad guys and the PCs are living in a colorful, maybe adventurous part of this society. Because when you think about it, in such a society, we would have very colorful people because so many things are possible. There would be a lot of people who actually do it. In Valerian, you have this weird race of shapeshifters, which are basically strippers and can turn into everything. And this concept alone is just so much fun, and you could make so much more out of that. You could create basically whole civilizations with just nothing but circus, or you could create an MMO which is made out of living creatures, which are just living to entertain another race or whatever. You could make so many stupid but cool stuff, and that's a huge appeal for me, at least.
Me too. Me too. So sometimes our like again our desire to be make sense or be realistic. Sometimes we need to put that in the back and just say, listen, this sounds like a great idea, and then just shoehorn it into the story, right? Shape-shifting aliens that become like what you desire them to be is a great idea. And how fun would it be for a PC to play one and not control what they look like to the people that they come in contact with? Would just be very fun. That would just be.
And they had been so generous in Valerian how they looked in their real form. I looked up how they looked in the comics. They look like fucking huge amoeba.
Yep.
Totally grotesque.
Yep.
Holy shit.
Yep. Nothing more fun than that than the PC's like, but she looks so beautiful. No, not really.
There is an old comic where something similar happens, and there's actually a scene where the main protagonist has sex with one of these things, and it turns into his normal form while they have sex, and he kills it. It's holy shit, that's nightmare material.
That's so fun. That is so fun. Well, unfortunately, we've reached that time. Gotta go. I have one of my feline friends is starting to explore around the computer, so I'm sure in a moment or two, a microphone's going to get unplugged or a light's going to get knocked over. Right, Sophie? Yeah, whatever. So we're going to call it a day. We've ended this technological series in with megastructure. So I'm glad you guys stuck along with me. We're going to get back to doing the regular series, and maybe in the future we will do it was suggested to do like the decades, like 1900s, 1910s, 1920s and such. Maybe, I don't know. I think there is something to mind, but that will be far in the future.
What I would find more interesting is world building in different genres.
Yes, sure.
Maybe building in a noir setting, building a comedy setting, building something like that. That would maybe be more interesting.
Yeah, I think that'd be more interesting than just like decades, but basically like themes. There goes her tail again. Yeah, she's just like I've got to be in your way and explore something. Don't get stuck back there, kitty. I can't grab you.
But you are not alone. I know a lot of role players who also stream, and they always have the cat somewhere. It usually jumps on the shoulder and shows its butt all the time.
Yep. She's not a shoulder jumper. She's more of a lap sitter. And
maybe you have natural problems for her here.
I do. I would have like, okay, come on, wait a minute, come on, kitty, come on. Don't get it twisted. Sometimes she'll come behind me and like use her claw and pull at one of my dreads and like to get my attention and stuff. It's cute. She never does anything. Like she'll even bite at him just to get me to play or something. It's kind of cute. So, but all right, guys, man, we'll see each other. Everyone have a great day. Dead Man brings up Tune. Hey, I've got the original Teenagers from Outer Space cartoon game. They actually have a stat called bonk. When you run out of bonk, you're just stunned until you come back, and you're sitting there with like stars and moons floating around your head. And anyway,
I would have to look that up.
Yeah, it's so silly. It's from our Talsorian games. It's very dated, but
I think
silly.
I've heard of it.
It's very dated, but it's silly though, man. All right, guys. So we'll see each other later.
See ya.
See ya. Cat started pawing at him. So all right, let's stop the bro.